That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Lee, the narrative debut of Ellen Kuras, which premiered at the 2023 Toronto International Film Festival. It is being released courtesy of Vertical Entertainment and Roadside Attractions on September 27th, 2024.
Directorial debut.
Notable cinematographer Ellen Kuras, who you've probably seen her work. She did Michel Gondry's Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, I think, where she initially met Kate Winslet. Also Spike Lee's Summer of Sam. Has a very prolific filmography.
What is Lee about? The story of American photographer Lee Miller, a fashion model who became an acclaimed war correspondent for Vogue magazine during World War II. What is your pull quote?
Despite her best efforts at getting this project off the ground, Kate Winslet approaches her portrayal of Lee Miller as if Rooster Cogburn were riding a Tarantino train to the Führer bunker in a biopic charred by its own self-importance on a budget too small to properly support itself.
Dang. Mine. Unfortunately, Lee fails to connect the dots from model to war correspondent beyond depicting a woman who seems headstrong and bored.
Yeah.
I agree with what you said. It just, I don't know. It's a miss.
It is. It's too overly when you have like you're mixing together ingredients that's like don't over mix. They need time to settle, and organically the chemistry of their reaction needs to create the lovely end product. And this just feels so overdone.
Yes. So Lee Miller is a war correspondent known for the photography she took during World War II, specifically a lot of images related to the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. So that's her claim to fame. And then her most famous image, I think, is her in Hitler's
bathtub,
in one of his homes, in the bathtub taking a bath that she took. So the way the narrative is constructed, the film opens with Lee Miller as a woman in her 70s, played by Kate Winslet in some crunchy ass aging makeup, talking to a reporter.
Or so we think. It's Josh O'Connor
from Challengers.
And if you happen to look at and La Chimera, if you happen to look at his the IMDb credits, it gives away the twist.
There's a twist to this movie that I thought was so unnecessary. But so it opens in 1975, I believe. Kate Winslet's character Lee Miller is supposed to be like 71. She's being interviewed by this man, although she's acting like he arrived unannounced, mm-hmm. and that she doesn't understand why she's being interviewed, which I thought was a really weird start. And she's reluctant to talk, but then she does. And we spend the next 90 minutes with her basically explaining how she met this man at the beginning of World War II.
Roland,
played by
Alexander Skarsgård,
moves to London with him. He's involved in helping with the war in like a non-combat way. And she seems bored and wants to work, so she gets a job with British Vogue. And we'll talk more about this, but she's supposed to be a model an ex-model. So when she walks into British Vogue, they know her. Like, oh, Lee Miller's here. Mm-hmm. And then some bitchy gay man says, girl, we don't need any old models right now. And she goes, well, actually, I'm a photographer. And they give her a job straight away. And then she decides she wants to go to, like, the battle zone. But the British government won't send her because they don't send women to do that.
And women can't have military access
clearance to
get to the places you want to take pictures of.
So she has the bright idea, well, I'm an American, so I'll just have the U.S. government send me. And they do. But when she gets to France, the military leaders there are like, girl, we're not having you just be in the way in these combat zones. So then she starts photographing like med units, injured soldiers. She starts wiggling her way into places. We'll get more into it, but I'm very confused sort of the trajectory of her career. But she ends up at one of Hitler's homes after he has been reported to have killed himself. And she hops in the bathtub, takes the photo. And then we cut back to 1975. And it seems like she's going to wrap up her interview with this man. And then all of a sudden she gets up and grabs a shoebox, mm-hmm. and opens it and starts giving him things. And she goes, oh, this was your first pair of shoes.
Your first drawing,
your first school assignment, the first picture I took of you with your dad. And then she goes, I know I wasn't a great mother. And so that's the gag, that was actually her son talking to her. But the real gag is that she has already died. This was all in his imagination. And then we realize that the movie is based on a memoir
that he wrote.
Saying that he didn't realize who his mother was until after she died, and he started rummaging through her things. Mm-hmm. And that's when I gave up, because I think the obvious better approach would have been to start the movie knowing that this grieving adult is at his dead parents' house uncovering this secret. Mm-hmm. And how cool would it have been to maybe, as he's rummaging through her things, maybe we look at like 4 or 5 of her most famous portraits, photos, and then we get the backstory for all of those. And then in the end, as the audience, it's almost like we know more about his mother than he does. The construction of this and that final gag just felt so cheap. I think for the film being directed by a cinematographer, it looks kind of cheap.
And shot by a very notable cinematographer, Pavel Edelman, who worked many times with Polanski, including on a very famous World War II film, The Pianist, also Ray. I think it's really more of a budget issue. They just didn't have what they needed to do to get this done right. It needed to have that feel of movies made with 80s ladies that had like the pomp and circumstances needed, like Meryl Streep or Jessica Lange or Gorillas in the Mist with Sigourney Weaver, where it's just like this is paying homage and bringing a sense of justice to this woman's experience. And now we're experiencing Lee Miller, again, much to the credit of Kate Winslet for getting this off the ground, but in a world where we already have a subgenre of many films with women playing war correspondents. I mean, the fact that this follows Rosamund Pike playing Marie Colvin in A Private War, or even this year's A Civil War, which Lee Miller is referenced in the Kirsten Dunst character. But all of these women have played war correspondents, photographers, Juliette Binoche, Isabelle Huppert. So it's just like this arrives like kind of a cornerstone of women in this profession, and it's this.
Yeah, it's disappointing. The vibe of the film gave me, we reviewed a film I think called Burial, mm-hmm. about a soldier who was part of the troop that took Hitler's dead body, like transported it, but then it's being told by this woman, this female soldier who was a part of the troop, like 40 years later, and then we find out that she has Hitler's head in a box. It has that look and feel. It also kind of had the look to me of like that new movie Apartment 7A.
Cheap.
Yeah. Okay.
Like some green screen. I know this was shot in Croatia, but I don't think it needs that mechanism of the interview, which it just feels, that is so Pablo Larraín, of course, did that in Jackie, and he does it again in Maria, which most people haven't seen yet, but I think it's ruinous. And also it has a twist in that movie. But I think that's become a really lazy way to get to some meaty exposition.
Okay. Well, besides not loving the feel and it feeling like it didn't have the budget it needed, I think Kate Winslet was the wrong actor to portray Lee Miller. Because Lee Miller's supposed to be a former model who is like in her 30s when we meet her. Mm-hmm. And Kate Winslet, I'm not trying to shade her, but she doesn't look like how I think she should look. And then when you look at the actual woman, it's not giving that same energy. And then when she's telling her story about how when she was younger, how she was just like this vibrant, sort of like sexually free person. Like she talks about how much she loved sex and loved doing it and loved hanging out with her friends. But she just seems like a grouchy middle-aged lady who's just stomping through every scene. Mm-hmm. And I think I loved her in Mayor of Easttown, but now I think and people made fun of her accent in that, but now I'm thinking that maybe that is her American accent.
I think the irony of having a Brit played American in Britain is kind of funny, but
because she's doing Mayor of Easttown in Lee. And so it just comes across like this really gruff woman. I'm not getting sexy. I don't know, just like how the story of this, like the tagline of model to war correspondent, you're thinking, I mean, Marion Cotillard's in the film. I feel like she would have made a better Lee Miller to me.
Marion Cotillard, poor thing, has nothing to do.
She has nothing to. And she's only in it twice. And the second time we meet her is after their home in France has been bombed. And she just looks like she's confused why she's in this scene. I don't know.
She really wanted to work with Kate Winslet, apparently. But you brought up a good reference point afterwards, like Diana Ross in The Wiz, where the labor this woman took to get this done, and then by the time it's made, it's like, this probably should have happened a decade before it did if it was going to star you.
Yeah, it's giving Diana Ross's
well, also,
Dorothy.
The amount of energy Winona Ryder put into getting Girl Interrupted off the ground,
Okay, I know there's also been a lot of talk about the nudity and how brave Kate Winslet is. I don't know about brave. I mean, she's showing her breasts. She has beautiful breasts. I'm more confused. Was Lee Miller known? They show her breasts so much that I was thinking, was Lee Miller like a nudie model? Like, was she a pinup that showed her breast? Because if she wasn't, it seems the moments where we see Kate Winslet's breasts seem gratuitous to me, because the first time we see them is when we first see her with her friends, I believe maybe in France. Yeah, and that's when she meets Alexander Skarsgård. But they're at this beautiful house in the garden about to have lunch. And there are like 7 or 8 people sitting around this table, and one woman is already topless.
Noémie Merlant, yeah.
And then Kate Winslet brings lunch out, and then she sets lunch down, and then immediately takes off her top, and so now she's just topless. But then Alexander Skarsgård shows up, and she decides to be modest because the stranger shows up. So that's the first time. The second time is now that she's moved in with Skarsgård in London as a couple, he's working with the government to try to make like camouflage paint or something, which I found way more interesting than what we actually see, which is she comes home and he says, "You promised I could practice on you." And she goes, "Okay, well, hurry up because I'm hungry," takes off her top, and then he starts applying this body paint on her. And then before we can actually see the result, which I was very interested in, all we see is her breast, and then they start making out as if they're going to have sex, and the scene cuts. The third time we see her breast is when she's about to get into the bathtub, Hitler's bathtub, which I thought was also gratuitous because
she says, "Don't show my breast."
Andy Samberg is assisting her in taking the photo, which we need to talk about his character. But she says, like you said, make sure to not get my breast in the photo because they won't publish it.
They won't go past the censors, yeah.
So I'm a little confused why we need to see her breasts so many times. They're beautiful. I like there's no problem, except that it's like, why that?
I thought she looked great. But,
she does.
But I think it was a way to show that, well, one, what can we show now that we couldn't when she was alive? And also that's saying something about the freedom that her character felt. I think I was more distracted by Kate Winslet's hair color, especially in one scene where she follows this woman who's taken some bread to where her family is, and all these women that have survived the war, and this little girl is very scared of Kate Winslet, and she takes her hair out, I think to show that she's a woman, not a soldier. But it's like, you have the hair color of the enemy, the Aryan nation hair color.
And looking at pictures of Lee Miller, she looks brunette. So I don't understand why Kate, as a young, quote unquote, younger woman, is wearing this awful bleach blonde wig. Because when we see her as a 70-year-old, I actually thought she looked better because she's wearing like a natural, like medium blonde wig. And then it seems like the old lady makeup, they kind of just went from the eyes down and made her look like she has sun damage. She's chain smoking for dear life. But I don't think she looked that different from 1938 to 1970.
No, not really.
Except the hair color. But, okay, Andy Samberg. So she meets Alexander Skarsgård, and again, the most unsexy scene when we had just received narration from her saying that she was like this sex kitten who enjoyed men and life. But then when she meets him, I don't know if we would qualify that as flirtation, but that came across like, so I don't know what he saw in her, except that she was the only single woman at the table. And then she's basically like playing hard to get by being not very appealing,
verbal
or
sparring.
friendly. And then he tells her he loves her.
Yeah.
And that they should move in together. And she agrees. And now they're playing husband and wife in London. And then it just seems like she's bored. So that's when she goes to get this job. I just don't think that the way this story is presented in this film, it's honoring this woman's intention. Like, I really just got the sense that Lee Miller, she even says in her interview with the Challengers guy, because she acknowledges, like, yeah, I didn't publish most of my pictures. I was just taking pictures. I didn't get the sense that she thought she was doing something noble or that she wanted to share these stories as much as like she just wanted to take pictures and no one was going to tell her no. No one was going to stop her from going to the places she wanted to go.
I think she did want to take pictures, and she wanted people to see them because there's a scene towards the end where she mutilates a bunch of them.
See, okay, let's talk about that scene. So she gets back from her journey back to London with all these amazing pictures she took of like war-torn whatever, and
That's a good memoir title.
War-torn whatever. And Alexander Skarsgård brings her the newest issue of British Vogue. And of course she's like, where are my pictures? Where are my pictures? They weren't published. So this lady runs down to the British Vogue offices, breaks down the door. Well, she's allowed in because she works there. Rummages through the cabinets, finds her film, and cuts it up.
And we didn't even bring up Andrea Riseborough, who is the editor that does like her, and is begging her to stop. You know, she's destroying what are now historical records.
But I was so frustrated with Lee Miller. Like, she didn't even try to ask, like, oh, are you saving these for the next issue? Is there going to be a special edition? Are you going to send them to American Vogue and they can publish them? She just immediately runs in and tears everything up.
Which is what happens, which is what Andrea Riseborough does. But I don't get the sense. So she couldn't go because she had to go back to her native country to get the job that would send her as a correspondent overseas. But then she comes back and sends all of her photographs to British Vogue, who didn't technically send you there anyway. Why didn't you send them? The
logistics of all that are confusing.
Yeah, I don't understand why she didn't automatically send the negatives to American Vogue, because why would British Vogue publish them? They didn't
send you there, right? So I just think the depiction of Lee Miller in this film, I was very unimpressed with her. Like, I wouldn't, like, if I were someone who was interested in journalism, journalistic photography, or photojournalism, I don't know that, like, if this was my first introduction to Lee Miller, that she would be someone who I would admire. She just seemed like someone who was stubborn, headstrong, and bored.
Yes, and then we didn't really talk about Andy Samberg, who is the life photographer David E. Scherman, who he's presented. It was giving very Gorillas in the Mist, as in like Alexander Skarsgård is like Brian Brown, this man that's lesser than but is attracted to her, and then Samberg is like the best friend that is the henchman that does all her stuff, like Simbagari.
Except that it's very milquetoast,
yes.
And they're having an affair, but like on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like Fatal Attraction, this little thing is like a 1.
Yeah. It's
basically him telling her, it's like he follows her around. At one point she's upset and jumps in bed with him to like complain. Mm-hmm. And he says, well, I just rather just enjoy you in my bed. Mm-hmm. It's just like, what was the point of that? I don't know.
But I did take him seriously, which is maybe a rarity. And so I didn't mind him, but
I didn't mind him. I didn't mind anyone except Kate Winslet.
Again, and I really like her as a performer. I just don't think this is... It just feels kind of manhandled.
What would you give Lee?
2.
It's a miss for me. I would give it 2 out of 5. Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.